When it comes to ITX PC builds, they can be quite challenging due to the size of the case. The lack of ventilation and good airflow can cause thermal issues as well as limit a PC's performance. So what if I moved everything inside from this large ITX case that features a bunch of high-end components for video editing and 4K gaming, and downsize it to this much smaller ITX case? How will it perform, and what would the temps be like? The difference between the two cases? The large RTX case can fit a 240mm radiator at the top, two 120mm fans at the bottom, and this huge graphics card, whereas this small ITX case cannot fit any of those parts. So it'll be safe to say the thermals will likely be worse in the smaller case. But there is a way to keep thermals down and maintain a high performance. First, I'll show you what it's like to build in this case, as there were some steps I had to redo because some of the components are just awkward to fit in this case. One thing I'll be changing in this build is the GPU. I currently have a RTX 5080 in the big case, but instead I'll be using a smaller GPU so I can fit it into the smaller ITX case. So I'll be using this 4080 Super by Palit in both cases so we can compare thermals and performance. If you haven't seen my build for this huge 5080 Game Rock GPU from Palit in the Cooler Master NR200P Max version 2, I recommend checking it out. I will link it below in the video description. First, I need to give the inside of this case a quick clean before I take it apart, as I'm sure there will be some dust. I don't think this dust blower is any good. Maybe today's video sponsor will be able to help. This video is sponsored by WolfBox. This is the WolfBox MegaFlow 200, a super powered turbo fan. It's a lightweight portable handheld fan that features high wind speed and large wind pressure. So getting rid of the dust from the inside of this PC case is going to be a breeze. You can even change the nozzle for more precision to get into those tight spots to clean. It comes with 4 different nozzles and 3 levels of wind power, which can be used for a number of scenarios, like blowing up an inflatable bed, clearing leaves, starting a campfire, and even drying your clothes. The MegaFlow 200 has a removable battery that can last up to 100 minutes on its first speed setting. It's a very convenient little device that I'm sure will blow you away. For more info, links are in the video description below. I'm not going to yap through this build as I've built in this case many times already, but I will have captions for parts of the build that's worth noting. So the build was trickier than I thought, mainly because of the large low-profile CPU cooler, but I got there in the end. So I tested the CPU in Cinebench 2024 in both the Big and Small ITX case. At stock settings, the Big ITX achieved a slightly higher score of 1948 points, compared to the Small ITX with 1915 points. Not much of a jump really, but the Big ITX did score higher because the thermals were better, as it was 10 degrees Celsius lower with an average temperature of 78, versus the Small ITX, which was 88 degrees Celsius, which is quite high. So I applied a small CPU undervolt with PBO enabled, curve optimizer set to -20, and a CPU thermal limit of 80 degrees in order to bring temps down, which it did, almost matching the temps of the Big ITX at CPU stock settings. However, it did lower the Cinebench multi-score to 1855 points, almost 100 points lower than the Big ITX. But in the real world, it didn't affect programs like DaVinci Resolve by much. This video editor program is both CPU and GPU intensive. I had the same smooth editing experience. For exporting a 6-minute 4K video, I undervolted the GPU for performance by setting it to 950 millivolts at 2600 MHz with a boosted memory clock of 1000 MHz. And it did export the video a few seconds faster than the Big ITX at CPU GPU stock settings. It's nothing groundbreaking, but when it came to gaming, it made a difference. When you compare temps with the Big ITX and Small ITX at CPU and GPU stock settings, it's clear that the Big ITX has better cooling. But with a simple undervolt of both the CPU and GPU, using the same CPU undervolt from earlier on, combined with a GPU temp efficient undervolt of 925 millivolts at 2550 MHz, and comparing it to the Big ITX at CPU GPU stock settings, the GPU temps were down by 6 degrees, and CPU temps were up by 3 to 4 degrees, which is still good as temps were hovering around 70 degrees. The FPS was down by around 8 FPS, but even then, that's not bad considering the lower temps and power consumption. And if you want, you can undervolt the GPU for performance to almost match stock settings in the Big ITX, but it does mean fan noise will increase. So, it is possible for a somewhat high-end PC in a large ITX case with really good cooling to be downsized to a smaller ITX with limited space and cooling, all just by applying a simple undervolt. Obviously, a Big ITX case has its advantages, like better cooling, low noise, more space, and the ability to overclock. But yeah, if I had to choose, I would go small as possible, as long as I can achieve decent temps and close to or better stock performance. Which type of case would you choose? Anyway, I will link everything below. Thanks for watching.